Hey, warmer from Vivo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. Joining me in segment number 2, one of our good friends, Rob Donaldson, who does such a great job with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's going to be joining me, and we're going to be talking about a wide array of different things. These guys going from year number 1 to year number 2 in the system, and the way that they're able to take off. Being able to just get multiple years out of a transfer as well, we'll be looking on that front. And the upside that you're able to get with some of these top 100 recruits, some of these guys that were very highly touted coming out of high school, that perhaps had a little bit of a silent year number 1, and what they can do in year 2 and beyond. So we're going to be chatting about that here in this segment. We did see a big piece of college basketball news involving a team that I think is going to be very good for this upcoming season. They unfortunately lost a player for the remainder of the season before it even got started. So we'll be chatting about that. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, and please do fire these in if you do, because we are sort of in that, shall we say, college basketball waiting period where the fall practices, they're going to be getting started up sooner rather than later, but we are sort of in that strange holding pattern. So do send in anything that you would like to hear on this podcast and you'd like me to just dive in on a little bit more, and you've got one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNR41. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast by that 5-star review, and unfortunately did not get in any of those Twitter/X questions today, so please do fire those in. But we did see for Gonzaga them lose Steele Venters for the entirety of the 2024-25 season. I want to talk about a guy that just has not been able to catch a break at all. He missed the entirety of the 2023-24 season with a different injury. He missed last season with a knee injury. This is going to be an Achilles injury, so I have to wonder if we're going to see Steele Venters in the 2025-26 season, as he spent the entirety of his college basketball career to this point over at Eastern Washington. From the 2021-22 to 22-23 seasons, was one of the better mid-major shooters in all of college basketball. During the 21-22 season, 16.5 points, 4 boards, shot 43.5% from three-point range. Most recent year that he played, 2022-23, more like 15 points, 3 boards, popped it from 3 at about a 37% clip, a career 84.5% three-point shooter, career 40% three-point shooter, and provides quite a bit of size at right around 6'7". Now, the good news for Gonzaga is that they've got plenty of guys that are going to be able to work in, and they're going to be able to help be able to make this loss not quite as bad as they pick up Khalif Battle in the offseason, a guy that, while he was over at Temple, was averaging darn near 20 points per contest last season. Over at Arkansas was a little bit touch and go, but a nice solid scorer that stands right around 6'5". Michael Ajayi, he's coming in for Pepperdine as well. He too is 6'7", shot darn near 50% from three-point range at Pepperdine. Season ago, you still have Ryan Nemhard in the backcourt, still have some versatility on this roster as well, and you have to figure that the guy that is going to see the biggest increase in terms of minutes, that's probably going to be Dusty Stormer. For Dusty Stormer, it was a case where he saw some minutes early on during the season last year, fell a little bit out of favor in terms of rotation, but he's one of those top 60 guys that saw 15 starts last year, shot about 36% from three-point range, was able to pull in there about 3.5 boards, gave the team 5 points per game, and even though the back half of the season wasn't necessarily so great for him, when they were in non-conference play, was able to do a nice job, especially towards those November, December months. He was averaging more like 5 to 6 points per contest during that portion of the season, so I have to figure that you're going to be getting a lot out of him. And this was another piece of news that we did see from college basketball as well. Zayden High, he was going to be playing over at North Carolina this upcoming season. He has decided that he is no longer going to be with the Tar Heels, and he is going to be looking elsewhere. He was the number 92 recruit for the class of 2023, really just did not get out there on the floor whatsoever this last season, and you figured that he was going to be behind likes of someone like a Cade Tyson. Did not view him too much as a guy that was going to be making a big impact on this North Carolina team, but having him out, that does hurt this team a little bit as he averaged about 1.1 rebound per game a season ago for North Carolina. Again, I don't think that this is going to be too much of a loss, especially with Tyshawn Claude coming into the program, as Hyde was right around about 6'9", has a little bit more versatility than Claude, but Claude last season in the ACC was averaging darn near 5 points, 5 rebounds per game over at Georgia Tech. I would view him as someone that will be able to contribute to North Carolina this year than Hyde would have been able to. Hyde was the guy that you're probably looking at more for like 2-3 years down the line to perhaps be a little bit of a developmental guy if you swung and missed when it came to the recruiting landscape, but that is a little bit of a loss for North Carolina as well. So that's what we did see in college basketball on Tuesday, and now coming next, we do have to discuss some of these former top 100 recruits with Hyde. According to a lot of those recruiting sites, he was a top 100 recruit. We're going to be talking about some of the upside that they can provide. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the situation that Gonzaga finds themselves in with Steele Venters now being out, and so much more. And we'll do that on the flip side here on Gonzaga Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Gonzaga Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast, and it's always great to be joined by this man as Rob Donaldson. He does such a great job taking a look at this great game of college basketball over on his YouTube feed, youtube.com/Rob Donaldson. He does the Rob's Best Bet show over there. A couple of that. I know that he's doing a great job getting set for what is going to be really a tremendous college football season. We got a little bit of a smattering of it on Saturday, but really get started in full force the next few days. He's been doing a great job on the baseball front as well, and you're able to find him on Twitter/X at RobDFB altogether. And Rob, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And I bring it up every single time, but certainly we are geared up for a bunch of different sports coming down the pike, and college basketball isn't that far away either. And so I'm excited to talk about it today.
Absolutely. And we did see a big piece of news that happened in college basketball on Tuesday with the man of steel, Steele Venters, who I thought was going to be able to step in at Gonzaga, potentially be a starter, be a nice double-figure scorer for them after he was out last year. Unfortunately, another setback. He suffers a season-ending injury. How do you take a look at a Gonzaga bunch that I still think that they're going to win their conference and everything like that, but in terms of being able to compete on the national landscape, I think that that's quite a bit of a blow.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's just so unfortunate because Steele Venters, when he was at Eastern Washington, was just such an uplifting scorer and just one of those chemistry guys that you just knew he was going to make the right decision. Very rarely turned the ball over as well, and just feels like a perfect Mark Few type guy as well. But they're still very, very talented. They're still loaded with upperclassmen, and when you have a bunch of upperclassmen under Mark Few, usually that's where the success really rings out. I still think it will, even without Steele Venters in there.
Yep, and when it comes to Gonzaga, I think that it was so big that they were able to add some depth in the offseason as well, because for Gonzaga last season, it felt like this was a team with a little bit less of it than they have for this upcoming year, because they do have quite a bit that is going to be returning from last year if they need to run things through the low post, having Graham Ike back. Obviously, that is going to be a big deal for them. But on top of that, you're bringing a guy in K-Leaf Battle, who I think is going to be a nice scorer. Ryan Nembhard is back as well. And I take a look at Gonzaga, and I think that they're one of the few teams in the country that is prepared to be able to deal with a blow like you take when Steele Venters is out.
Absolutely. And even when you do look at Gonzaga's schedule and just kind of, the draw that they are still going to have in the WCC, it's not like there's this immediate threat that jumps out to you when you look at their schedule. A lot of neutral court environments against some of the better opponents on their schedule. And I think this is one of the more talented Gonzaga teams that we've seen in a little bit. And especially with a bunch of upperclassmen that have enough experience in the system, I think they're still going to be, a team to reckon with, especially from a betting front.
And when you take a look at a situation like this, how much would you, for lack of a better term, rather have something like this happen right now rather than in season? Because you never want to lose a guy like Steele Venters for the season, but I feel like when it happens in late August, it's much easier than if it happens like night number 1 of the season where you're preparing all off season to go in and have Steele Venters either be like a sixth man or perhaps be a fringe starter, and then you have to pivot. Meanwhile, now you have a few months to be able to get things all squared away.
Absolutely. I do think this is a very good time for it to happen, unfortunately. And the biggest reason is, just the minute log. Usually in the first month and a half of the season, teams are still trying to figure out, what their rotations are and who's going to be getting playing time over another player. This at least eliminates sort of some of that dilemma with Steele Venters and how he would have fixtured in, because he would have been competing for playing time, probably would have been a starter, but at the same time, he would have been pushed by a lot of talented guys around him as well. So it does clear things up from just a minutes perspective, and certainly, coming in the preseason, that's definitely a positive there.
Yep, and it's going to be interesting to see what we do get moving forward out of Gonzaga, as they did a nice job with regards to their transfer class, and it was looking like they were going to have a little bit of a redshirt situation with themselves as well, as this is a team that they very much do look to develop through their system, and they brought in quite a few guys in the offseason and thought it was so interesting what they did in terms of bringing in Braden Smith from Colgate. Now perhaps he sees a few more minutes as well. As joining me on the show, we do have one of our good friends, Rob Donaldson, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Rob, when it does come to Gonzaga as well, they do have a few guys that are going to be looking to take that jump in year number 2 after spending year number 1 in the system. I was mentioning Ryan Nemhard. I was mentioning Graham Ike. How do you take a look at so many of these guys? Because we always think of that year 1 to year 2 bump being from freshman to sophomore year. But I think in this day and age of the transfer portal, it now trickles down to these transfers that spend multiple years at a system as well.
Absolutely. And, part of this new college football and college basketball landscape, when you are looking at the addition of the transfer portal and just the prevalence of NIL, I think you are doing a disservice to your team or your program if you're not diving into the portal, but continuity still matters, and they've done a really good job of balancing it out. They have guys that they brought in from the high school ranks. They have guys who are in year 2 from the transfer portal. And even this offseason, despite having a number of talented guys, they went out and, added a Khalif Battle type and an Ajayi type and, to pair with what they already had. And I think that blend, I think they're doing it perfectly. Building from the high school ranks, building just from the transfer portal and then keeping those guys in the program for multiple years and then still looking to add. I think that's the recipe for success in this new modern age.
I do think so as well. And when it comes to college basketball in this day and age as well, I think that it is so important that when teams go into the transfer portal, they do try to occasionally find guys that are going to be there for multiple years, because no doubt about it, when you bring in a graduate transfer, you're not expecting that guy to be there for multiple years or anything like that. But I do think that a lot of these better programs, they should be looking to be able to bring in a guy that maybe didn't pan out as freshman and try to be able to develop them for multiple years. And I think that the way that the transfer portal is being used is much different now than it was a few years ago, where it was just all about rentals. And now I feel like it can almost be a, shall we say, second chance at recruiting, I think is the term to use.
Absolutely, and especially because there's a lot of talented dudes who maybe academically or maybe just from the high school that they came up with didn't get the attention that they deserve based on their talent. And, once they prove it at, say, like a Missouri Valley level conference or, one of these other mid-majors like the Southland, for example, I think that they definitely should be sort of the proving ground right there, bringing up and then develop them even further to their potential against higher level competition. I think that's what's going to really make college basketball as a product a really strong one over the next 3-4 years. And I think we're actually already seeing it, to be honest.
Yep, I think so as well. And it's allowed a lot of these guys to be able to be at a program for multiple years. We obviously still have the one and dones, but with NIL, the way that teams have been able to secure these guys for multiple years, look no further than Kansas having Hunter Dickinson back for year number 5. He would have went pro just a few years ago before NIL. I think that that's been making a big impact as well. As joining me on the show, we do have Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the Rob's the Best Bet show. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And are there a few teams that you do identify that they have a few guys that maybe they joined for year number 1 as a transfer after spending a year or 2 at another school that you think are going to be able to make some inroads and you think that they're going to be able to develop very favorably? Because I do think that, once again, that year 1 to year 2 bump in a system is very big, and one team that I was talking about in Gonzaga is big, but I take a look at another school in Alabama, being able to bring back some of these guys like a Grant Nelson, like a Latrell Wrightsell, and I do think that that provides a lot of upside for them moving forward.
You took the words right out of my mouth because the first team, when you were leading into that question, I thought of was Alabama. I mean, they made some of the bigger splash moves, acquiring Mark Sears, Grant Nelson in past years, and then this year they stayed active in the portal, brought in obviously Aiden Holloway, Chris Youngblood, Clifford Amuri. I think that's just the way that you have to be able to do it is, utilize the transfer portal, again, not for just these stopgap rentals, but guys that might actually have longevity in your program, because if they're talented enough to hit the open market and take in, enough interest, they're going to be talented for, a second year in your program, even more so. I am very, very bullish on Alabama. They're one of my top 4 teams entering into the season.
Yeah, with Alabama, I think that they are going to be able to have a tremendous year. Would like to see a little bit more defense than a season ago. That was a little bit less than savory from time to time, but they were able to put together some absolutely incredible offensive sets, and that carried them to a Final Four last season. And then feels like everything's coming back to Gonzaga on this podcast, because I take a look at another team with having Efton Reed, Hunter Salas, pair of guys that went from Gonzaga, went on over to Wake Forest. And that's another team that the more that I look at them, the more I feel good about them, because in the ACC, as we know, you've got Duke, you've got North Carolina, those should be your top 2 teams. And then from there, I think that number 3 is very much out there to be had. And with Wake Forest bringing back those 2 guys, with them having a guy in Parker Fredrickson, who's a nice 3-point shooter, bringing in some good talent like an Omaha Blue that a lot of people forget. He was like a top 20 recruit and just could never get out there on the floor in the state of Iowa. I look at that team and I really feel good about them for the upcoming season with those 2 guys from Gonzaga in year number 2 in the system.
Absolutely. And you nailed it with Omaha Blue. Shout out there, because I'm an Iowa resident. We've been hearing about this guy for the last 4 or 5 years, with just how freakish of an athlete he was. And when he went to Iowa State, everybody was assuming he was going to make an instant impact. And instead, it was actually a different true freshman on Iowa State last year, Momcilovic, who ended up kind of doing his thing and balling out. But Omaha Blue, still very, very talented. And to your point, Steve Forbes, if you want a guy who's going to be able to coach his players and make them productive offensive scorers and really just be competitive overall from, elevating that side of the floor, I think this is a great lineup and just a great rotation of guys to throw at opponents and really, surprise them and do really well.
And I think that brings up something so interesting as well. And it's something that I have found in past seasons with regards to getting set for an upcoming season. Taking a look at these guys that were former top 50, top 100 recruits that maybe they just didn't get a lot of run at their old school. Like with Omaha Blue, it didn't work out with them with Iowa State. But it's not like he spent a lot of time out there on the floor. It's not like you could say that he was necessarily ineffective, because we just really didn't get to see what he was able to do in general. I look at a school a few years ago in Auburn who brought in Walker Kessler. He just didn't get a lot of run with North Carolina, goes Auburn, it leads the country pretty much in block shots, becomes a first-round pick. How much do you take a look at some of those guys that they were highly touted recruits, they just really couldn't get off the bench at their previous stop? Because I think that those are some of the teams, when they bring in a guy like an Omaha Blue, like Wake Forest is doing right now, that could provide some of the most upside of any team in the country.
Oh, absolutely. And usually we're kind of looking at those guys through the framework of, they played at a high level program and then transferred down to a lower mid-major. But certainly, with NIL portal being open and, guys being willing to take high upside chances on players in the portal who maybe don't have a lot of experience, I think we're going to see more and more, these 4- and 5-star guys that maybe got passed over for playing time because of a transfer portal addition that was a stopgap rental type, really emerge at a different high-level school. And especially with, all these conference realignments, a lot of the mid-majors are evaporating as it is anyway. So a lot of these players who are transferring from one program are probably going to find themselves playing high-level basketball somewhere else as well. So absolutely, that's one of the things that you definitely need to be keeping an eye on, even from, the standpoint of, hey, this guy was a 6-man or just a rotation piece, and now he's playing an elevated role elsewhere. I think a lot of that can provide a ton of value in the betting markets.
Oh, I'm right there with you, as we do have joining me Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the Rob's Best show. He is joining me on Cuss Cuss Hoops And is there any other players other than Omaha Blue that really stand out? Because when I think of these guys that they did flame out a little bit, but they've got a lot of upside, that was really the number one guy that did come to mind for me because 247 Sports, all those recruiting sites had him as a top 20 guy. So I think that he's going to really be able to emerge and have a big time year. But is there anyone else that you take a look at that maybe it didn't necessarily pop for them in season number 1, but in season number 2 and beyond, you think that there's a lot of upside with them?
This guy, I guess, is a little bit more highly billed than Omaha Blue was, and he got a lot of playing time as well last season. But I look at a guy like Davon Smith, who went from Utah to St. John's. Utah was utilizing him as pretty much a six-man for a lot of the season behind Rollie Worcester, and he was kind of in this, almost assist role, just kind of being the guy who plays both sides of the floor, average at best, and just kind of doing a jack-of-all-trades sort of thing. But when he got the run in the NIT, he really showed out, and he really showed his upside. And I think in an expanded role at St. John's, that's a guy that I think, was just putting up just kind of a stat stuffing type line each and every single game last year. But I think he could really emerge as one of the guys in this St. John's lineup. I think Pitino is going to be able to maximize his skill set really, really well.
And you bring up something so interesting there because for Davion Smith, he really didn't get a lot of playing time in the first half of the season. It's because Rollie Worcester went down with an injury and he stepped into a bigger role. And how much do you want to take a look at some of these guys that maybe they didn't get a lot of run in the first half of the season, but they emerged late. So it looks like they put up like average to slightly above average numbers last season, but in reality, they were really doing a nice job towards back half of the season last year as perhaps bust out candidates for this year.
Absolutely, 100%. Those are some of the guys that really do transcend a team or elevate a team into a different tier, are those guys that were developing on the back half and then maybe just didn't get a shot in the NCAA tournament, or maybe they did and it just wasn't enough. And that's where I really think that some of these teams that have added true freshmen and really stuck to the high school recruiting ranks rather than just passing them up for, transfer stopgap rentals are really going to be rewarded, because it is going to be those guys that are really taking those strides from the high school rank, continuity within the program, and then year 2, year 3, really breaking out and helping a roster that maybe really needed it and maybe hasn't seen it in quite some time.
And you know who I'm thinking of as you're talking about that? Jizzle James over at Cincinnati, who we did see get a lot of minutes in the NIT. I'm not sure if you've had a lot of a chance to be able to take a look at Cincinnati, but with them bringing in Dylan Mitchell in the offseason from Texas as well, I think that this team has all the goods to be able to make the NCAA tournament with a coach of Wes Miller that I have all the respect in the world for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Cincinnati was one of those teams that started off very, very hot last year, was building a lot of, hype leading into their first year in the Big 12, and then held their own. It was one of those things where Cincinnati, UCF, the teams that were the newcomers in the Big 12 last season were almost seen as doormats, if you will, for the rest of the league, and especially those power teams within that league. But they definitely played up to their competition and really showed out, more so Cincinnati than UCF, but certainly both did, their part in competing in that conference. And absolutely, when you look at those types of teams, I think now that the jitters and the prove-its have kind of been proven in terms of they already kind of competed in that conference and now it's year 2 of that experience, I think those are going to be some teams that also take a massive jump up.
Yep, I think that there's going to be a lot of upside with Cincinnati for this upcoming season. I think it's also going to be interesting, as I know you're a Big Ten guy as well. We saw a pair of guys in Cohen Carr, Jeremy Fears over at Michigan State be top 50 recruits. Didn't necessarily see the world's greatest amount of time year number 1, but as we know in that Thomism system, the longer you're there, the more seniority you rack up, the more minutes you typically get. I think that those are 2 bust out candidates as well.
Oh, 100%. And I think you nailed it with talking about Xavier Booker and Jeremy Fears. And I can't remember which one was, but midway through the season, one of them actually got shot. They were on break for, I think it was winter break, and they got a gunshot wound. So if that's not a traumatizing freshman experience and potentially a derailing for your season, I don't know what else is. And yeah, with Tom Izzo and another year with Michigan State in that continuity and even learning from the players that were previously there. I mean, Michigan State last year obviously underperformed, but still made an NCAA tournament, made it to the second round of the NCAA tournament, and was loaded with individual talent. I don't think it's possible to go through that experience and improve as a young player.
Yep, and what we've always found with Michigan State, when the expectations are highest, that's when they underachieve. When the expectations are lowest, That's when they overachieve. That is the Michigan State way, and the way that you roll, my friend, is by always providing the goods. As Rob, I know you're doing an amazing job getting set for the upcoming college basketball season, but on top of that, you're doing absolutely amazing work taking a look at baseball, taking a look at college football, and so much more. So let the good people at home know what's on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, always appreciate you having me on. And certainly we are gearing up for a lot, and a lot of my content's going to be found on Twitter/X at RobDFB, and also on YouTube at just my name, Rob Donaldson. And as always, Greg, really appreciate having me on.
It's always great to be able to get Rob aboard. He does such a great job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. So big thanks to Rob for joining me right here on Cuts Gut Soups, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Cuts Gut Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, do have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at June_41. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. I'm with you guys all 366 days this year. I expect some more conference previews coming in the next few days. I have to get things all fortified in terms of SWAC, but looking at the SWAC and the Sun Belt being done sooner rather than later. And then we're on to the W's in terms of the conference previews with the mid-major conferences, and then we get into the Atlantic 10. We're also going to be getting into the Big East, all those Power 5 conferences. So we've got a lot of fun coming up on the podcast here in the next few weeks, getting you set for what I hope to be the most successful and profitable college basketball season ever. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.